A full-time worker in the United States earning the federal minimum wage takes home $15,080 a year, working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, no vacation, no sick days. $15,080. The federal poverty line for a single adult in 2024 is $15,060. That's a $20 gap between what the law requires employers to pay and what the federal government officially defines as poverty. $20 annually. This is not a story about people who don't work hard enough. This is a story about math. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It has been $7.25 since July 24, 2009, over 16 years ago. That is the longest stretch without a federal minimum wage increase since the Fair Labor Standards Act was signed into law in 1938. During those same 16 years, rent went up, groceries went up, health insurance went up. The cost of a basic American life, according to the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, rose 106% between 2001 and 2024. The Consumer Price Index, the government's own inflation measure, rose 77.2% over that same period. Even the official number couldn't keep pace with what people actually spend money on. The minimum wage kept pace with none of it. In 1968, the minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. Adjusted for inflation, that $1.60 is worth roughly $14.81 in 2025 dollars. The federal minimum wage today has 46% less purchasing power than it did at its 1968 peak. Not because wages were cut, because they were frozen while everything else kept moving. Now let's do the math that nobody on television seems willing to do. After federal income tax, Social Security, and Medicare deductions, a full-time worker minimum wage takes home approximately $1,125 a month. That's the real number you actually have to work with. The average rent in the United States right now is $1,148 a month. Not Manhattan, not San Francisco, the national average. A full-time minimum wage earner's gross monthly pay is $1,276 before taxes, and average rent alone is $1,148. After taxes, rent exceeds take-home pay entirely. That leaves $128 in gross income for food, transportation, utilities, healthcare, a phone, clothing, and any unexpected expense at all. $128. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition publishes an annual report called Out of Reach. Their 2024 edition calculated the housing wage, the hourly rate a full-time worker must earn to afford a modest apartment without spending more than 30% of their income on housing, which is the accepted standard of affordability. Nationally, the 2024 housing wage for a one-bedroom was $26.74 an hour. For a two-bedroom, $32.11 an hour. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. The 2025 edition raised that two-bedroom housing wage to $33.63, more than 4 times the federal minimum. To afford a two-bedroom apartment at minimum wage, working 40 hours a week, a worker would need to clock 116 hours per week, nearly 3 full-time jobs. For a one-bedroom, 97 hours a week. There is not a single county, metro area, or state in the United States where a full-time minimum wage worker can afford a modest two-bedroom rental at fair market rent. Not one. In 1984, rent consumed 41% of a minimum wage worker's paycheck. In 2024, it consumes 90%. That shift didn't happen because workers got lazier. It happened because wages stagnated and housing costs did not. Then there's transportation. AAA data shows owning and operating a small sedan runs roughly $6,521 a year, about $543 a month. That's nearly half of a minimum wage worker's take-home pay for just one expense. Most minimum wage workers cannot afford a car, but in most of the country, you cannot get to work without one. The jobs that pay minimum wage are not in places buses reliably reach. The Economic Policy Institute's Family Budget Calculator, updated with 2025 data, tracks the minimum income needed to cover basic expenses across every county and metro area in the country. Their conclusion? As of 2025, there is no county or metro area in the United States where a minimum wage worker earns enough to meet a basic family budget. Not one county, anywhere. Now, some will say, just earn more, work your way up. And that argument deserves a real answer, because there is a mechanism almost nobody talks about that actively punishes low-wage workers for trying to advance. It is called the benefits cliff. Many minimum wage workers receive some government assistance, SNAP food benefits, Medicaid, housing subsidies. These programs exist because minimum wage income is not enough to live on. But each program has an income eligibility threshold. Earn too much and you lose the benefit. The problem is the benefit is often worth more than the raise. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta has documented this in detail. Their finding? These benefit cliffs can be so severe that low-income workers may be temporarily better off financially by not advancing to a higher-paying job. That is not a fringe opinion. That is the Federal Reserve. I'm trying to do better. They talk you into doing better so that you don't always have to rely on having help. But it's hard when you're kicking me down when I do better. Makisha, documented by the Federal Reserve, Fed Communities, 2023. A case documented by the Federal Reserve's own publication involved a woman named Makisha, a mother of 4, working nearly full-time, 6 days a week. She received a raise of $1 an hour. That raise added roughly $200 a month to her wages. She lost more than $800 a month in SNAP and housing assistance. Her words are in the pull quote above. Another case, a worker needed to decline 1 additional hour of work per week, worth $17, because that single hour would have triggered a $300 per month loss in SNAP benefits, a $17 gain for a $300 monthly loss. That is not a failure of ambition. That is a rational response to a broken incentive structure. Research cited by the Foundation for Government Accountability found that at least 1/4 of low-income workers face a lifetime marginal tax rate of 70% or more. The median lifetime marginal rate for the top 1% of earners is 50%. The poorest workers in this country face steeper effective tax rates than the wealthiest, once you account for benefit loss. A study published in the Journal of Poverty found that in Colorado, 34% of welfare recipients make work decisions specifically to avoid the benefits cliff. Some turned down up to 12 additional work hours per week to stay below the eligibility line. This is not laziness, this is arithmetic.
Low-income households also absorb inflation differently than everyone else. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis found that over time, low-income households experience roughly 10% higher inflation than the highest-income households. They spend a larger share of income on housing, food, and energy, the categories that have risen fastest. When housing costs spike, a minimum wage worker loses their apartment. Everyone else adjusts their discretionary spending. According to Bank of America Institute data, roughly 29% of lower-income households were living paycheck to paycheck in 2025, up from 27.1% in 2023. In late 2025, wages for lower-income households rose just 1% year-over-year, while inflation ran at 3%. The gap between what they earned and what things cost widened every single month. Of the nation's 20 most common occupations in 2024, 14 paid median wages below the one-bedroom housing wage. Those 14 occupations employed more than 64 million workers, 42% of the entire U.S. workforce. These are not fringe jobs. These are the jobs that run the country. So when the advice is to budget better, budget what exactly?
After taxes, rent at the national average exceeds take-home pay. No budgeting app solves a $19.49 gap in hourly wages. No skipping coffee closes the distance between $7.25 and $26.74 needed to afford a one-bedroom apartment. The federal minimum wage has not changed since July 24, 2009. In those 16 years, the S&P 500 more than quadrupled, corporate profits set records, and the people cleaning offices, serving food, stocking shelves, and caring for children are still being paid a wage that, in real purchasing power, is worth less than what their parents earned in 1968. A full-time worker earning $7.25 an hour makes $15,080 a year. The poverty line is $15,060, $20 of separation. That is what 16 years of inaction looks like. That is what a 46% decline in real purchasing power looks like. That is what it looks like when the system tells someone they are working and still tells them they are poor.